Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
The Quiet Warrior. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. It's Tom Dutta, like butter. I'm your host, and man, I got to tell you that I very rarely timestamp a show by what's going on in the world, but did you look at the news the other day? I mean, it's October the 11th. I mean, just so you know, we just had our Thanksgiving here in Canada. I'm on the West Coast, Vancouver, British Columbia. And this thing with Israel, it just blew my mind. And so we have a great guest on today. We'll be talking about a lot of things. Storytelling is the narrative behind this show, and this man's a master. But I woke up today, and as I was in the green room, I put on a little makeup and just to make myself look pretty. And I just couldn't stop thinking about what people are going through in that part of the world. So I have to just say that because I'm an emotional guy, and, you know, we're going to be laughing, having fun on this show, but I know there's a lot of people in the world that are struggling. And so we're saying our prayers and we have them in our thoughts. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. We're live streaming. It's the next generation of podcasting. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So if you're in there, you can chat live with us, ask some questions. And let me tell you a little bit about our guest today, Mark J. Carpenter. He's a serial storyteller. He eats cereal and reads books. I think that's what he's going to be talking about. As a child, he loved to tell stories, mainly to get attention is what he told me. He leveraged the ability into a career in marketing, communication, public relations, then as a college professor and corporate facilitator. So very diverse. And now he teaches people how to more intentionally tell stories that teach, lead, sell, and inspire. To accomplish business and personal goals, he is the co-author of the best-selling book, Master Storytelling, How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire, and the co-author of the Master Storytelling Workshop. He's got a lot more to what he's doing here, and I got to tell you, everybody, that I got the audiobook, and I listened to it twice, and it's fascinating. And you've got to, get this book and read it, put a review out on it. Shameless plug, but it's highly worth it. So welcome to the show, Mark J. Carpenter.
Thank you so much. And I'm impressed that you listened to the audiobook twice, because that meant you had the sound of my voice in your ears for 2 hours and 50 minutes twice.
Yeah. What I didn't tell you is the first time I fell asleep, and then, oops. And no, I'm playing with you here. As you know, I have this dark sense of humor, but yeah, it was great. And what's really cool is when you have an author come on and you've heard their audiobook and then they're speaking to you, you close your eyes and you go, I know that guy.
Yeah.
So pretty awesome.
While we're on that, just a quick funny experience. And I was facilitating a workshop, completely different, completely unrelated to master storytelling. And it was a multiple day virtual workshop. On the third of the 5 days, I had one of the participants private chat me and say, hey, are you the same person who wrote Master Storytelling? And because we weren't even talking about that, I was kind of surprised. And I said, yeah, that's me. And her response was, I've been listening to your audiobook and I just figured out why your voice is so familiar to me in this other context here. And so it was just really kind of funny that she did finally make the connection between my voice.
Yeah, there's something about that. And then there's a big decision. Some people say, do I hire a voice actor? Do I use my own? I think you did the right thing there, Mark. I just want to tell the audience that when I invited you on the show, I think I challenged you a bit and said, okay, what's your deeper story? I do that with everybody because I love them. And, we don't care about the greats and the titles and all. We also care about the gut punches, the criticality behind that. How'd you get to where you are in your life? And everybody, Mark wrote me something. So I'm going to read this to us and let you hear it. He says, love the Quiet Warrior concept. It's taken me a while to discover my why. Comes to this. I got so burned out with leaders who thought command, control, and power plays that I left corporate life. And my goal is to create leaders and facilitators who lead like people instead of like positions. And so start there. Let's go back to the beginning, anywhere you want to start, what shaped you. And when you talk about burnout, I mean, what happened to you on the way?
Yeah, boy, it's so interesting. And I actually really loved that question. I love that you start with that, Tom, because it did make me think about it and think about my journey a little bit more. When I started out, I had really good leaders. I had compassionate leaders and then not just compassionate, but they got good results too. They held me accountable, but they really helped me start on the wrong path. And then I ended up changing industries, and I got a lot of leaders who were very much in the command and control environment. And it burned me out pretty hard. And as I started into my first people leadership roles, I found myself drifting into those command and control things because that's what had been modeled for me there.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of forgotten the more people-centric leaders that were there before me. And honestly, it repulsed me a little bit about myself. And I wasn't happy with who I was becoming and who I was. And so it's taken me a while to kind of get back to what is that difference? And it really comes down to what I put in that answer. It's the difference between leading like a position and leading like a person. If I'm leading like a person, I'm saying things, and I literally had somebody say this to me. I sign your paycheck, you do what I tell you to do.
Wow.
That's leading like a position.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leading like a person is saying, well, explain to me why you see this differently than I see it. Because we had a different of opinion on something. And
yeah. Let me jump in there. And who shaped you? Who do you think shaped you most? Your mother or your father? Who shaped that part of you? Not just the bosses, but you came into that. Somehow, right?
Yeah. And it's definitely my mother, because my parents were divorced when I was very young. And so I grew up with my mother and my grandmother and my 4 siblings. And my dad is a good person, but he wasn't involved in our lives very much.
I see. Yeah.
And so it was very much my mother and my grandmother that formed my life. And I'll even go to my grandmother, who was kind of a tough little bird, all of about 5'1" tall, but she grew up in a rough time in the early part of the 1900s, and you did not mess with her. Okay.
I'm starting to visualize and paint this picture of her.
Yeah. And it's
what part of the world? What part of the world?
Arizona, down in the desert in Arizona.
Wow. And you said your parents, your parents divorced when you were young. How old were you?
5. Yeah.
Goodness.
So I was 5 years old.
Yeah. So my story's got parallels at age 12. I mean, it was different circumstances, but yeah, I mean, when I was in the corporate sector, I started my career and then ended up at high level of leadership. I found myself, I don't know about you, but I found myself looking for people to replace my dad because I was looking for father figures. And it's funny because sometimes you'll have grandfather, you'll have an uncle. I didn't have any of that. So I started finding these arrogant, insensitive, command and control business leaders. And it's interesting what you said, but I totally relate to that. Plus, before I give it back to you, my father was in the military, so command and control was part of growing up. He was in the British forces and Canadian forces when we landed here. And I just remember my dad's, he used to drive me and say, I'll kick your ass if you, and you had to do things here. So Mark, when I went into leadership, I'll follow my sword because I love you for being vulnerable and saying that you didn't like what you're becoming. But I would drive people so hard, they were sinking in their chairs. When I got my first 360, it was like the words grandstanding, and it's always about your agenda. We're on my feedback, and I was like in denial. Yeah. And I went on that long journey, over about 20 years of my career to unravel that. So take it back and take us from that point in the story where, okay, here you are, your parents, age 5, you're finding your way in the world, and then you get into this command and control type of environment in your career.
Yeah.
What changed at that point? What was the moment?
And I'll even go to some parallels that you were talking about in terms of, the leaders that I worked with. Because I grew up with my mom and my grandma, I didn't know how to deal with men in leadership positions, basically. Yeah. I was always, as a middle child, I was a people pleaser. And so I was always trying to make people happy. And so when I got that command and control type of thing, my trigger is I'm not making people happy. And I would just try to fall in line. But then I found myself not being true to myself. And that's, I think, where I started becoming more and more miserable. And I realized that part of what it was, and this has been a more recent epiphany, as I look back, part of the reason that happens is we set up new people leaders to lead that way. Because think about who gets promoted to lead a team. When they become a first-time people leader, who gets promoted? It's the highest performer on the team or the person that's been there the longest, right? Now, are those necessarily the best people to lead other people?
No. Well,
Maybe,
you
maybe
don't
not.
know, maybe, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a total crapshoot as
Yeah.
to whether they've got the skills to do it,
Yeah.
because they've got all these position skills. But then think about how we develop them as new people leaders. We say, great, congratulations. Here are the car keys to your leadership car. Hit the super freeway. Good luck. Don't crash. And we tell them, here's how to run your budget. Here's how to set agendas for your meeting. Here's how to do all these process things. And we give them position skills. But what do we not give them? People skills. We don't give them the people skills to listen effectively, to communicate clearly, and articulate things in a way that people understand it, or to even recognize people for the good work that they're doing. And those are critical people skills that I think that we skip as we bring on first-time leaders. And that's where I think the gap is that we can close. We can start closing that gap.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And man, you sent me on a journey in my head about this because I think I can't remember if it was a quote from an actual president in the United States or someone. I don't even know, fact check it if you want, but something like the world. I believe the world's like run by C students, something like that. That you just don't know. But the people who are coming up, even the next gens, there are so many talented people coming up, and yet we kind of give the promotions to the ones who are the loudest and whatever. And I want to add another layer and see what you think about this. But you take a guy like me who came from a world of maltreatment in my childhood, and many of my followers know my work. My brain wasn't developed, so through neuroscience, the stress system in my brain was developed differently. So I go into the real world, and at 31, I became my first CEO role. And man, I'm in an organization, and I'm seeing the world out there differently than the world sees itself. In other words, I'm sitting in a room and somebody raises their voice and I start melting into an emotional puddle and seeing danger, and the fight, flight, freeze response comes on. I call it the smoke detector, trying to say, Tom, is there danger there? And I start having conflict with situations that I shouldn't. And I think about that, and I think about the thing you said, which is so brilliant. We're not teaching people how to listen. We're not teaching people how to be leaders, how to get to the heart. I totally think, everyone, that's a teaching moment from Mark. And then I think, man, sometimes it's such important work you do, because I think 80% of the people in the world are broken in some way. So you've got to be able to understand how to teach leaders to be leaders through their heart. I think they call that transformational leadership, not transactional, right?
Yeah. And we all have these levels of dysfunction in our lives. I mean, let's be real. As much as some people will put on a really good front, or families put on this really good show, we're all dysfunctional at some level.
Exactly.
And the hard thing is, we're dysfunctional at different levels. So, you talked about melting into that emotional puddle when somebody started pushing back. I'm the same kind of way, but sometimes that reaction turned for me not to melt into an emotional puddle, but to defend my position at all costs, whether I believed it or not. Because our body, our physical system, doesn't recognize the difference between a physical threat and an emotional threat. And so it responds the same way, and it starts sending us that adrenaline rush. And then we're not thinking as clearly as we can in that moment. And we don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
When I first learned that, I remember looking back on my life and going, oh my gosh, that is like the source of every huge mistake that I've ever made in my life. And even understanding it, it takes a while to learn how to control that and to get beyond it. But we don't teach leaders how to do that. And so they lean back on their position and they say, look, I'm in charge. Just do what I tell you to do. End of discussion.
Yeah.
Quit arguing with me about this. And I can replace you with somebody next week if I need to. Well, that doesn't get us to better results. And it certainly strains the relationships within the organization and the team.
Yeah. And especially there's scarcity of talent now. And I look at my daughter's 25 in university. She's in the area called New Brunswick, the other side of the country, Mark. And she's a personality type. In personality science, I use a framework, and we call her a white personality. And so my thinking is has the motive of peace. Like, can we all just get along? You know, she used to go to her room when she was younger, and in 5 hours, and they were their headset on. And we thought she had depression or something, but she goes to her happy place to escape. And I'm thinking, you can't lead people today the way, like you said, command and control. Some of the people just won't stay.
Yeah, absolutely. You're seeing the costs in that. There was a study, and I hope I'm going to get all the numbers right here. And I wasn't prepared to cite it, so this is going to be kind of off the top of my head. But they asked the organizations, how many of you believe that leadership development at all levels is really important? And it was like 83% said, yeah, absolutely. Now, I worry about the 17% who said, no, we don't believe leadership development is that important. But 83% said, yeah, we believe leadership development is important at all levels. But only 5% of them said that they had something in place to develop leaders at all levels.
Wow.
And
I'm just making that note here.
Yeah. And at the same time, these organizations, 84% of them said, we expect a leadership shortfall within the next 5 years.
Goodness gracious. And we're seeing that play out, right?
Well, that study was done in 2020. And so, yeah, I think we're seeing it play out right now that is coming to fruition. And where does it come from? I think it largely comes from not developing people to lead like people and to really understand what it is that connects us. I was talking to an organization just yesterday about some of this people development, and they said, well, we want to get some people in who are not people leaders yet, but we want to see if they can develop these skills so that they can become people leaders. And I was like, oh, bless you. Because that's what we don't do. We get so focused on, let's give people the position skills they need to succeed in their positions, and then hope that they get the people skills that they need when they become a people leader. And that's opposite. We should be checking. We should be developing people on their people leadership skills and then get them into the leadership roles if they're good at it. Because at the same time, you're going to get people who that's not their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quick example, if I can. I used to work in computer software. I did marketing communications for some software companies. There was a guy who was a software developer and was promoted to be a team lead. And I remember talking to him a few months after he was promoted to that position. And I said, hey, that's so cool that you've been promoted to the team lead. And he goes, I hate it. I said, what are you talking about? He says, I never wanted to be a team lead. I said, well, then why did you apply for the position? And he said, it's the only way I could get a raise because I was capped out on my salary range as a developer. And so now they've shoved this person into a leadership position purely for the financial reasons on his side. He hates it. He knows he doesn't have the skills for it. And we've just set this person up and his team to fail.
Well, I just want to jump in there and riff with you. Man, as you're telling that story, and by the way, everybody, we're here with Mark Carpenter, the co-author of Master Storytelling, and they were telling stories. And I'm thinking about that, and there's a saying that came into my head, quality of life is not equal to a quantity of stuff. And think about this, Mark. And I know a lot of guys, because of my executive coaching work, that when I became that high-level leader, I had and the paycheck kept getting bigger and bigger. And I said this in a talk I gave. I said that I was a success, I was a success chaser. And really, every time I got a bigger paycheck, guess what? We had to renovate the kitchen. We had to buy another place at the lake. I had to have a nicer car. And when I had my brain injury in 2018, everything crumbled around me. And today, I live with what I need, not what I want. And I'm not tied to it's such a freedom, but I know so many people, as you're talking about, in that arena where they're tied to a paycheck. And it's a horrible thing. You can't unravel it when you're tied to your debt, right?
Yeah. And it's important to have opportunities to grow. I mean, life's expensive and we need to be able to accomplish things and do the things that we want to in life, including maybe renovating the kitchen. But I'll go back to the example that I just gave. Why couldn't you create an opportunity for this person who's a fantastic developer and say, well, let's create a new range for you so you can continue to contribute in the things that you have passion for, the things you're good at, the things you love, and contribute to the company, rather than us saying, no, the only way that you can move ahead financially is to go into this leadership position that you don't want, that you're not going to be successful at, that you're actually going to probably damage other people in the process. But this is the path that we're going to force you into because it's the path.
Yeah.
And we put people on these paths. And that was my own experience. I was chasing a path that once I got down that path, I went, I'm not happy here. I don't know why I'm on this path. And I had to change paths to get to the point where it was like, okay, now I'm happy. And I financially took a step back there.
Yeah.
But it's put me in a position where I'm so much happier and I'm at least as financially successful as I was then.
Yeah, I'm going to honor you for saying that, everybody. I'm going to honor you, Mark, that is true vulnerability, but you recognize you're misplaced, as I say, or you're not where you want to be, and you did something about it. I also want to throw something controversial out that some people might think is controversial, but that I've been studying a lot about brain science, neuroscience, because of my recovery, and there's many emotions, but the first emotion, not the only emotion, the first emotion is always fear. The brain goes to fear. I think you know this from some of the work I've read. And so when you're in a job and you say, I hate my job, when I used to hate my job, it wasn't always hating my job. It was hating what was going on in my head. It was something that a lot of the insecurity and fear comes from within, not from without. And, there's just so many layers to this. I want to shift gears and ask you about this book. Do you have a physical copy with you of the book there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna full screen you there, and I want you to just hold it up and tell us the title of it. So
sorry, I went on mute so I could cough for just a second.
That's all right.
Yeah, I've got the cover over my shoulder too, but yeah, Master Storytelling, and the subtitle: How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire.
Fantastic.
So that helps define a little bit more of. It's not how you're going to write the next epic novel or anything like that.
I'm glad you mentioned the big book back there, because I was looking at it going, what's that thing hanging off his ear there? it's starting to curious, and so we're going to do something fun here. Are you okay with this? So just hold on. We are live, so this will be edited and made nice, but just stand by. I want to bring something on the screen to share with you, and hold on a sec there, Mark. Tell us, by the way, what the J stands for and how long it took you to read the book. Just riff at us for a minute while I get this set up.
Yeah, so the J is probably the most second common J name, because anytime I ask people to guess what the J is, they usually get it on the second guess. It's James.
Oh, really?
Yep. They usually go John first and then James.
Okay.
But that's where the J is. That's a family name that's carried down as middle names through some generations.
All
so
right.
even my son has a J and his son has a J. So
I can call you Dr. J. Interesting thing. So many, as you're telling stories, isn't it fun how you find commonalities? So when I'm a middle child, somewhere along the way you said that. Yeah, we're talking about middle names. Get this. My parents had the wisdom, and in Canada we love hockey. I would never be a hockey player. I had too many letters. Tom Dutta is a simple thing. But on my birth certificate, it says Thomas Ashok Harold Dutta. Ashok was my dad's name, who passed away. Love my dad in 18. But what was Harold? It was the doctor that delivered me.
Oh.
And so I have two other brothers, and we all have a third name of the doctor that delivered us. I mean, come on, go.
But that's fascinating. I mean, that's a great little family story.
Oh, well, thank you. Now I'm going to replay this back to my parents and apologize, because somebody actually thought it was fascinating. All right, what we have on screen here, and we're going to have some fun, the Audible. If you've ever heard yourself being read to, we're going to listen to a couple minutes of this. So you ready for this?
Okay.
Let me just go to my controls here. And tell us about Daryl Harmon while I'm setting this up again, too.
Yeah, so Daryl and I met as I kind of transitioned my career into facilitation, and we facilitated a lot together. And we, storytelling was a big part of what we did. The book came about because I at one point said to my wife, I feel like I need to write a book, but I don't know what it is. And she was the one that nudged me to, you got to tell people how you just take these everyday life experiences and turn them into stories. And I didn't think that was a thing, because that's just something I do.
That's right. You're good at it. You're good at it.
And she nudged me that way. And then as I started kind of down that process, I started talking to my friend Daryl about it. And Daryl was at a
That's
place
cool.
where he was kind of in between things.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let's write it together. And
I
so that's
I
how
love
we
it.
ended up doing it together.
Yeah, and in the book, I like how it's structured, everyone, and I also like the fact that there's a cool little thing up front where they say that the book was written, but it, like some authors will say, I'll do this chapter, I'll do that, but it's ubiquitous. I mean, it's like you guys collaborated, and you don't know who's who. So I think it's a great piece of work. Let's just listen for a couple minutes. I found this piece that I found fascinating. We'll get you to talk about it. Just give me a thumbs up if you hear the sound once it started.
He felt that storytelling was the key to making 60 Minutes work successfully. He was no doubt right. The power in stories. So what is it about stories that captivates us? Several things come into play that help stories grab us by the ears and minds and hearts and make us listen, learn, and feel. In brief, stories are how we think. They're how we experience life. They're natural to us. Anecdotes combine colorful snippets of real life bathed in irresistible emotions. Neuroeconomist Dr. Paul Zak has studied the brain chemistry involved with stories and has found that they trigger the release of certain chemicals in our brain. Specifically, oxytocin and cortisol levels are elevated when we're enraptured by a story. Oxytocin increases our empathy and feelings of emotional safety. It's what Zak calls the trust hormone. It tells us that it's safe to approach a person or enter a story.
Let's just pause it there and get you to talk to us. I think there's some magic in that piece about these chemicals. I don't think too many people understand the power of storytelling and how you can hack the brain. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, and I'll go back a step before that too.
Sure.
In that comment about stories are how we connect with each other. If you think about the history of mankind, and I'm old, I'm not that old, but to go all the way back to the history of mankind, but this is how we connected with each other. You meet somebody out in the savannah with your family, and it's like, okay, friend or foe. Well, it's how we communicate with each other that we're going to be able to establish that trust and whether we can work together. This was survival skills for us, was to be able to relate to and connect to other people. And then more recently, Dr. Zak and others have done some great research around what's happening in our brains that make that happen. So when you hear a well-told story, one of the first things that it triggers in you is this increase of oxytocin. And Tom, this has happened to us over and over and over again in our time together. We talked about how we're middle children, how our fathers died when we were younger. These are things that we can relate to each other. And all of a sudden, because of that relatability, we trust each other more.
Yeah.
It's an automatic thing that happens. And it happens because of the increase of oxytocin that we get in our brains.
Amazing. I'm going to keep going with the clip, but something you said, imagine back then when there was no internet and you meet somebody in the middle of whatever, and they want to know, how do I get to the local pharmacy? So you're telling a story. Hey, you go down that street and, there's this little post. It looks like that. So you're starting to write, like, beginning of time, no typewriters, things like that. We communicate with stories. We'll get you to talk about this when I give it back to you after the next part of the clip. But I'm fascinated why in the leadership domain, you're doing great work in this area, but throughout my career, I never saw too many leaders master or use the art of storytelling. And yet many of them wondered, why can't people trust me? How come people don't like the top leader, And it's like, learn some skills as you're teaching us. Let's go on with the clip a little bit.
In short, stories fast track trust. Cortisol, on the other hand, increases our focus and attention, which is why we can feel transported from our here and now reality to a there and then state, placing us mentally within the story and making it irresistible. We take the journey with the storyteller. We can't resist. Additionally, when we tell stories, we can trigger a nice hit of dopamine, a neurotransmitter connected to the brain's reward system. Dopamine, like oxytocin, makes us feel good. It's released in anticipation of a reward, as well as when we finally receive the reward.
All right, we'll stop there. Great voice, by the way. That's you doing that. Tell us about your experience, by the way, doing an audiobook. What was it like going in studio and doing that?
So it was a blast, actually. I thought it was just a ton of fun to do. When Daryl and I were talking about doing the audiobook, he said, "You're doing it." I mean, it was just like one of those, this is not up for debate. And I said, well, should we hire somebody? He said, no, you do it. You got the right voice.
You've got a good voice. I'll
And
give you a little bit of an applause
oh,
here.
thank you. Yeah, I do have a little bit of theater background from when I was a kid, and so I have developed the voice. I've worked at
Fantastic.
it. But I will tell you this too, it's completely exhausting. Just focusing on getting the words right, getting the diction right. And it was amazing how many times the sound engineer had to say to me, okay, stop, you got to go back because you missed a word in that sentence. And my brain didn't miss it, my mouth did.
Yeah.
And so you always have to have somebody to catch you with that. But I think the book's like 2 hours and 50 minutes. It took about 6.5 hours to record it.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I was totally exhausted by the end of the day. But I thought it was a super fun experience too.
Congratulations on doing it. And for people like me who have difficulty reading because I've had some visual challenge, listening is amazing. But the experience of listening, and at the same time you can actually read and listen, it creates this brain experience. But go back to that part of the clip there and tell us more. I'm more interested too about. Give me a story about someone you taught to do this, and what the outcome was. Someone in business.
And let me kind of simply walk you through those brain chemicals with just a quick little story, just so you can see where it connects in,
Sure.
and then I'll connect you into where it kind of ties into business.
Okay.
So we see stories really forming into three big chunks. Yeah, and there's the whole Joseph Campbell narrative journey and things that has like 18 steps in it, but we narrowed that down to kind of three chunks: an introduction, a conflict, and a change, because it ties to those three chemicals that Dr. Zach's talking about. So in the introduction, you set the stage for the relatability. Okay, so I'm gonna do this with a story that I tell pretty frequently. I was driving to the airport one Sunday afternoon, heading out on a business trip. Traffic was light. Wasn't thinking really much about what was going on. Just, I needed to get to my flight, thinking about the good week that was before me. Good day, not a lot of traffic. So there's the setup. You can relate to that because you've been in that car.
Yeah.
You've been driving to the airport. You've been on that journey. So that sets up the oxytocin. We're sitting beside each other. We're compatible here. So here's the conflict part. I look in my rearview mirror. Who's right behind me? Police officer. Right? No lights on, but there's a police car right behind me. And my first thought is, dang, how fast was I going? I wasn't even paying attention. And then of course I go to the next thought, which is, crap, he's going to pull me over. He's going to give me a ticket. He's going to ruin my day. He's going to make me late for my flight. And I wasn't even going as fast as other people. And so I decided to test my theory. Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. And so I pull over a lane. I move over a lane to the right. Cop car comes right over behind me. Now, what does this do to my story that he's going to pull me over? Just builds on it. So you can feel a little conflict building here, right?
Yeah.
And this is where your cortisol kicks in just a little bit, because your brain automatically is going, what's actually going to happen?
Yeah.
You want to know the conclusion. And so that's where the cortisol starts building in. So I'm building this up in my head. I got my speech to give to the police officer about why he shouldn't give me a ticket. I take the exit that goes to the freeway, and it splits. One goes to the freeway, one goes to one freeway, and one goes to the airport. We get off. I head off to the freeway. He just heads off. I head to the airport. He heads off onto the other freeway. He wasn't even coming after me at all. And I'm sitting there going, holy crap, I just worked myself up over nothing.
Yeah.
And I did it completely to myself. So here's the change. You see where the dopamine now kicks in?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you have that satisfactory ending of, yeah, dang, I've done that before.
Yeah.
How could I stop doing that in the future? So the change is where the lesson comes into the story, and it makes that connection. And so I almost guarantee as you listen to this, the next time you get in one of those modes where you start running away with this ugly thought in your head, you'll start thinking, this is kind of like Mark when he was driving to the airport.
That's right.
And I want it to, because I want you to be able to learn the lesson from that and maybe overcome or avoid the problem that I created for myself that day of working myself up over absolutely nothing.
That's amazing.
That's how the brain chemistry ties into those different elements of the story.
Yeah.
And you talked about how leaders don't use this, and then they wonder why people aren't connected to them. Well, they think that they're going to build credibility and the strength of their leaderships by sharing data and information and facts and figures. And I worked with a leadership team at a bank who was totally into that mode. And I taught them how to tell stories, and I taught them to tell the stories about how their people are contributing to the top line goals of the organization. And when they started doing that, all of a sudden they started collaborating with each other across functions better. And they'd start meetings with, let me tell you the story of why we're here today and what we're really trying to accomplish. And people were engaged immediately in it rather than checking out and looking at their clocks and wondering when they could get out of the room.
Totally.
It is amazing that we think that data and charts and facts and figures, as important as they are, because I think it's still important to have data and information, but they don't connect us as people, and they don't help people remember. Stories help people remember.
It's very interesting. And there's, would it be fair to say that there's some people, I mean, you're good at it, telling the story. Empathy is a big part of this. There's some people that are not as emotion based, and they have difficulty telling stories or sharing emotion. It's really interesting because everybody, we're with Mark J. Carpenter's talking about his book, Master Storyteller. Mark, hold it up again so we can see that. All right, I'm going to make a shout out here, everyone, thanks, Mark. Everybody, I want you to get this book, but authors are known when you read their books and post a review on Amazon, on Goodreads. I'm going to give you a review for the book. We'll get that up there. What's interesting about stories is that when you tell them, I always say this on my show, like I'm telling you now, I say my mind's going in 1,000 directions. When you started telling that story about the police officer in your rear view, it's like, man, I had multiple versions of that story that were just evoked. Now, I like how you're talking about the brain chemicals. So everyone, you know me, that I've been studying neuroscience quite a bit. And cortisol I thought was a bad thing. But cortisol, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but cortisol actually just creates you in this heightened sense of alert. All right, you're fully alert with all your senses. And it's okay to be in that state. If you're in it all the time, it can lead to challenges. And I grew up that way, where I was always in alert. What the stories that came into my mind was, one was, I was used to leave the home at 5 a.m. My daughter was young, and go to the airport, 45-minute drive, Vancouver International, and, always getting on a flight, but being rushed. And I had that experience with a couple of times with a cop, and so it took me back there. But you know what was connected to it? Also, it evoked this pain, this guilt, shame, because one of the things I used to say to myself was I was a frequent flyer, not a frequent father. Those memories evoked in me how I hated that time of my life for 5 years, where I orphaned my daughter, didn't see her much, was always, getting that big paycheck, always rushing off to a flight. And so while you're telling that story, I'm chuckling and having some fun with it. I'm also going over here in my head with that other part of my story. And what's interesting is when you said the outcome, it created this hope. It created this, the dopamine. It created like, okay. And I went straight from that part of my story into it's okay, into how everything worked out. It's amazing. I want to just say to you that I found a piece of a scientific paper, and I can't quote it all to you, and I might send it to you. You might be interested in telling me what you think, but it's brand new research. It was actually referred on a show by Andrew Huberman, who's with Stanford University. The Huberman Lab is another podcast I listen to, and the reason why I do that, Mark, is when I had my brain injury, I couldn't walk straight, I couldn't speak, I couldn't all these things. They sent me to an advanced neuroplasticity clinic locally here. 14 weeks I was there. Incredible stuff. And one of the things they said is you got to start listening to Andrew Huberman. Anyway, I listened to him, but he revealed this paper, and it said that get this, you're in Arizona, right?
Utah.
So you're in Utah. I'm in Vancouver. Let's take my wife's brother who might be in Italy. And they say if people are listening to the same story, doesn't matter what time zone, what location of the world, we all have baseline heart rates. But they've now shown through the studies that there's synchronicity of heart rate. It's amazing. So you're telling your story. Everybody just listen to this magic he's teaching us. Mark's telling his story, and my heart rate is literally, if you did a EEG, my heart or whatever it's called, my heart rate's like, dude, you're messing with me, but I'm going on that journey and I'm in that story. So it's fascinating
Yeah.
stuff.
So I would love to see that study. There's one that we do cite in the book from Uri Hassan at Princeton, where he talks about tracking people through functional MRI as one person's telling the story and one person's listening.
Wow.
And they find that the listener to the story is tracking shortly behind the storyteller at the beginning, but then as the story progresses, their brain activity starts syncing up and the same parts of their brain start getting in line. So think about this, and from a leadership standpoint, if you want people to be in sync with you, story is one way to do that. You talked about the heart rate in sync, but also our brain waves kind of being in sync there. And before we get too far away from it, I want to go back to your comment about cortisol, because you're spot on. Cortisol in small amounts is a good thing. It heightens our attention. It increases our focus. You get too much cortisol, and it's what you were talking about experiencing as a child. It's distracting, and it's destructive physiologically to us. So don't build too much stress in your story. Build enough that it's going to heighten people's attention and get them to think about, well, what's going to happen? What's going on here? But not so much that it's distracting.
That's fascinating. Everybody, a teaching moment here from Mark on cortisol. And I go back to what you said about leaders. Imagine you're in a room and the company's having difficulty and you're the leader talking to people about, we've got to be taking a different direction. You realize, or maybe you don't, but your room is full of people who are in fear. There's a lack of certainty. Their lives are in a mess maybe, but they're feeling the stress in the company. Through what the work you're doing, that if that leader can learn to understand the impact of his story has on the brain of the people in the room, he can create less fear. He can create hope. He can create certainty that, we're in this together. Things are going to be okay.
Yeah. And I love that one of your takeaways from the end of that story I told about driving to the airport was that you had some hope at the end. This is what we want to be able to instill as leaders. Let's instill some hope. This it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. This is leading like people. What is a leader's job? It is to help get the best out of their people. It's not to do their position. And that's another shift that comes from transitioning between being an individual contributor to a leader. Is I'm no longer focusing on doing my job. I'm focusing on helping other people be successful in their jobs. And so if you as a leader can find ways to instill hope and learning and the right behaviors in people, then that's success as a leader. It's not just doing the job. I'll go back and keep going back to this example of the software developer. He found that when things got stressful and when people would come to him with problems, he'd say, okay, fine. Just tell me where you are in that. I'll write the code. He would revert back to doing the position things. And that's what he thought was being helpful. But he wasn't developing his people in the process of doing that. He was going back into that position mode. So it's our job as leaders. People is our job as leaders. And it's helping them to be successful.
I know you do public speaking, and I love watching speakers who tell stories. And the same with TED Talk. There's so many who they'll stand on stage, give facts and figures. And then there's others who get it. And some of the books by the CEO of TED even talk about why should you use storytelling. It's like, I see some TED Talks, and in the first 5 minutes, the person standing there's no PowerPoint slides, there's no nothing. They're telling a story, and the entire audience is captivated, and they're in that, and they're doing one thing. They're getting a single thought in their brain into the brains of others. Yeah. And I had that experience myself personally in 2020, and that's where reading your book just hit me again. It's like, if somebody can stand on a stage and tell a story and get 1,000 people in an audience aligned to them, if only there could be somebody out there teaching business people how to do that. And that's where I honor your work so much. Let's shift gears here, and we're going to do something fun. We've got somebody here who's a fan. I'm going to put it up on the screen there. We're actually getting people chiming in. This is from Suma and Kari. In the context of what Mark was speaking about people bringing sync, I recall reading a part on that in Lisa Feldman Barrett's book, 7.5 Lessons About Our Brain. And, then he's like, that was just a typo, just a clarification. I want to say thanks to Sumat for that. I think he's in India, actually. And the power of even storytelling. Here we are. We have somebody, I believe, in another part of the world listening in, and Mark's evoking with his thoughts somebody else's thoughts, and they're sharing it. Just powerful. If you're on the live stream, everybody, please put a comment in the chat. Mark, I want to take you on another journey for 5 minutes or 7 minutes, and this is something new, a new segment. So are you willing to play a little bit?
Let's go with it. Right. I'm having a blast so far, so let's have some more fun, Tom.
All right, man. I'm having a blast too. So although I'm sure parts of the world aren't having a blast right now. So this is called Plato's Garden. So I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint slide, and then we're going to set this up. And I'm going to do a little bit of funky music here and there. We're going to make this all look good. And I explain it to you once I get it up. So just stand by there. Okay, I should explain that. You will get final say, sir, whether that makes the final show. I don't want to dominate your show, but I need to explain what that is. And the magic of iPads. I'm a dummy when it comes to creating and technology, but I did that on my iPad. And so I told you, Mark, just in the green room, that I started a doctoral at Middlesex University in September. And while I don't want to shine the spotlight on that, one of the things that they're teaching me is to go into Plato's garden and do what's called critical thinking. So that little clip there, you see some images. You saw the Tom with his hat on backwards, little Canada flag. That was taken on Canada Day here. I think I had a couple beers. My wife and I were in a park. There was one at the end where there was a picture of, it looks like a painting. That was my first acrylic painting. I decided to do acrylic painting a month ago, and it was actually a picture of neurons. So I strung all this together. And what I'm going to do, and I might come back to you in a year, is ask your permission to use parts of what you're going to talk about here through my doctoral thesis, because I'm looking to get people to join me in critical thinking. So let's go back and put this on the screen. And so that's you see Plato and Aristotle there in the garden, right? And what was fascinating is that Plato's garden was actually just outside of Greece, so you can do the research on it. But he's an Athenian philosopher. We're on the screen here, everyone, during the classical period in ancient Greece, and the Platonist school of thought in the academy, and academy coming from the word academia, from the character I can't say it properly, but academus, I think. This was the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Now, the second line there on the screen, I wrote the words criticality, knowing, being, and doing. And so what they're having me do in my doctoral is learn to focus on knowing and doing versus being. So we're always being in the world. We're being. And what I'm understanding, and my professor told me, is that business people don't do this very well. Business people think fast. They don't always ask the deep questions. They don't always look at what's behind, the threads behind things, and the knowledge. They don't look transdisciplinary across other disciplines to learn. So in other words, if you're in healthcare and you want to create a better experience for your customer, you go to other healthcare institutions, but why don't you go to the cruise ship industry and talk to people on the deck who are having a great experience? So this whole criticality and critical thinking is something that's deep and new to me. And as Professor Kate told me, that business people are, it's like 2 + 2 = 5. They don't do this very well. So now that I've set that up, I have a slide here, and I'm going to read the first part, and then I'm going to ask you to read the number 1. So we're what we're going to do is explore these 3 levels of influence. One's called macro, meso, and micro. One can uncover the deeper meaning and connections that led you to embrace the storytelling as a powerful tool for teaching, leading, and inspiring others. So what I want you to do, Mark, without too much stress, just have fun with this. I want you now to read number 1. This is the first question. Read out loud and then just reflect a bit, and let's have a conversation. So just read that out to us.
All right, you're jacking up my cortisol a little bit here because I'm not sure what's going on. No, just tying back to what we talked about before. Okay, on macro, at a broader societal or global scale, what significant shifts or events were happening when you made the transition from the business sector to becoming a storytelling advocate? How might these broader influences have shaped your decisions to focus on storytelling? Yeah, so on that macro level, I would say there were economic things that were going on. This was mid 2000s, so like 2005, 2006 was when I was starting to make this transition. And so there were a lot of economic factors that were kind of at play during that time, as the dot-com bubble bursting and those types of things that made it a more natural transition for me to say, okay, now's a good time for me to shift, to make this shift into my life. And the shift wasn't even initially to storytelling. The shift was initially to teaching, where I'd been teaching as an adjunct professor, but then I got into more corporate facilitation at the same time.
Interesting.
So that's what I would see as kind of the macro level of making that transition.
Amazing. Everybody, Mark Carpenter here, the author of the book, Master Storytelling. We're in Plato's Garden. We're doing critical thinking. And what we're demonstrating here is by looking at a macro level, you just heard in a broad brush, not in detail, we're just hearing from Mark what was going on in his life at the time he started making this shift. So what I want everybody to do is think about in your own life. You can think about something that was a major shift in your life, but step back and focus on the knowing and the doing. What was going on at a macro level in the world? Like, for example, we started off the show and we talked about the Israel thing. And if I ever talk about this show, at this point in time, that's what's going on. So it's those things that actually can influence my thinking. Mark, I'm going to read out question number 2. This is the meso level, so I'm sort of saying it's in the middle, and then we'll get you to talk a bit. So focusing in on your sector, what specific dynamics or trends were prevalent within the business sector you were working in at the time you began your journey into public work with storytelling? How did these sector-specific factors contribute to your desire to explore storytelling as a means of leadership and inspiration? Take your time.
Yeah, and this may even be my first thought may be a little too macro on it, but because I'm thinking in terms of the generational workforce and kind of where we are in the transition of work. We talked about the deficit in leadership, and that we're in a work world today where leadership is changing. Leadership has to change in order to survive. And so I would say within that sector of training and development, and also in the sector of small business leadership, the shift is coming in how people expect to be treated by their leaders. The command and control is just not acceptable anymore. Yeah. And people will just walk away from that. We're in a situation where people can say, no, I don't have to put up with this. I'll go drive for Uber for a while. I've got so many other options of things that I can do that you don't have the business control over me as a person. We need to recognize as leaders that people are more and more valuing being treated like people, even in the workplace, and not as positions.
What a great answer. Everybody, teaching moments here from Mark Carpenter. We're doing some thinking in Plato's Garden. My brain went on a journey when you said Uber driver, and I just remembered a mentor told me that everybody who's, particular entrepreneurs, have a side hustle, and that as you're building your business, it doesn't go straight up. So, they don't tell you. I think Warren Buffett, I heard somewhere said that, most people create their wealth after age 50 something, but, man, I'm being vulnerable here. When I started my own education platform, I had a side hustle. I had to do something to pay the bills for a while. Let's go into this third question. This is one of my favorites. And the reason why we started everyone with macro, then meso, is we kind of fill that in. This is now micro. So read that out loud there, Mark, and then let's riff on it.
Yeah, and I'm losing the last line just so you know when we get to that. But on a personal level, could you reflect on your own experiences, emotions, or realizations that prompt you to pivot towards storytelling as a central theme in your work? And then I've got, were there any personal turning
I'll fill that in. Thanks for pointing that out. I'll fix that for next time. Personal turning points personally for you that led you there, and I think you've talked about some of that.
Yeah, I actually did. It's funny. The first thing that came to my mind was pointing back to that experience I had with my wife, where she said, "You need to teach people how you do this." And honestly, my initial reaction was resistance. It was, "Oh, come on. That's not a thing. That's not a book. That's just something that people do." And she nudged me on a little bit. And the more I started talking to people, the more I realized this is something that I do know how to do. I don't exactly know why. And so part of that personal turning point was getting into the why behind what it was that I was doing and how I was doing it, and finding out that there's a lot of research that backs up what I had somehow naturally picked up along the way. And so I guess the micro level for me was the realization that, yeah, I have a skill set that's going to have value to other people, and that I can help other people with this, and not just help other people with storytelling, but help them to really achieve their goals through leading more like people.
That's such a great teaching moment. Everybody come back and just listen to this last part. The thing that came to mind too was when you were talking about the word burnout. And so if I even look deeper into that, this might be fun to talk about in more detail when we have more time with you, Mark, but think about if you just keep going back and back and back, you go, okay, at that moment in time, there's the burnout because of the command control people. But go back if you went back even to childhood or to early years and found the threads and you said, oh my God, I remember when I was, 18 years old and playing street hockey or whatever, and I was telling this story and it had this impact. You go back and now I understand, just from thinking about this, I understand what that thread from that early part of my life meant. I mean, I think that storytelling has been in you, but this gift, and I think there's a lot more criticality that we can get out of you going. It wasn't, in my view, the command and control point was a data point, but I'd love to turn you inside out and learn more, but I think it goes deeper than that.
Don't you think so? It does. And I actually have thought about that some, Tom, that as I go back to my childhood, I was the one who always wanted to be telling the jokes and telling the stories and making people laugh. And I mentioned it very briefly in my bio. That was my way of getting attention. That was my way as the middle child to stand out a little bit. Wow. But then I look at it from a value standpoint, and it wasn't just to tell stories. I wanted to make people laugh. I wanted to make people happy.
That is awesome.
You have this value of, I want to help people get better. I want them to feel successful. I want to help people succeed. That's a value that I think was instilled with me really early on in my life. And it really kind of demonstrated itself early on as a storyteller.
That's fascinating. And I just want to finish off with that point that you had said something earlier about you, when we were talking about, I think, doing the book, audiobook, something about, were you a performer, or were you said something to me? I can't remember what that was.
Yeah, I did some theater in high school. I did some community theater and around that time of my life.
All right. So now, and this is my specialty, I'm not perfect at it, but I've done this long enough to start figuring out the hero's journey and the journey. And so I'm starting to learn more about, you want to make people laugh. There's a theater piece. It's those things. And I always say this, Mark, that you're an awesome storyteller. There has to be something deep that's a burning desire behind it all. And I think I just thought of something that helps me on this. If I'm trying to coach or teach a business leader to tell stories, I got to find that burning thing in him that's not about the business. Yeah. Like, you want to be on stage, you want to be there making people happy and all these things, but isn't that true? That's what's burning behind this. Yeah.
I love that point, because sometimes people, when they're saying, okay, I've got to develop the skill of storytelling. Okay, how do I tell these stories about myself? And and it becomes about them. And that's a key point that I teach all the time. No, this story is not about you. I know it's your experience. And so it feels like, well, but it is about me because it's my story.
Yeah.
But from that point, it's about you. But the point of the story is the point.
Yeah.
It's the lesson learned. And that's not about you. That's about the people you're talking to. So what is it you're trying to contribute to them? What is it you're giving them as the gift through this story that they're going to remember better, that they're going to be able to contribute to more? I worked with an organization recently that they have all of these values, mission, vision, values things that are on the walls, right? But right now they're just words on the walls. And so I said, tell
Absolutely.
the story that shows how these words on the wall translate to the behaviors in the halls. Well,
Love it.
how does that connect? And I was coaching some people, and they were saying, "Wow, we had this great experience in our group where we did this and this and this and this and this, and we got this result." And I said, "Okay, that's fine as an experience, but what's the lesson? What does that even point to? What's the story?" And once people got focused on, "Oh, this is what we take away from that. This is the value that other people can get from it," all of a sudden there was this shift in the way that they told it. And they told it in the form of a story because it was about helping other people in some other way. And that's where the value is going to come in. And that's what's going to strengthen your storytelling, is understanding what your purpose is in doing that. That it's not about you. It's about them.
Yeah. That is so powerful, man. I'm just thinking about that. These words on the walls, it so resonates. In the times I've been in business, but also when I went in and started doing training, and you get these words on the wall. People, you ask people privately, what does that mean? You get different stories. Sometimes there's this neon sign flashing on their head that says, "I'm confused." I just want to share with you this, that I have a guy that I know that I actually coach him, but he runs 12 construction companies, comes from India. And so he always talks to his people about family culture. He started, and I think I planted a seed a little bit, but he started telling the story of when he grew up in Punjab, where his father owned a farm, and his father didn't have a lot of money, but his father always had this thing where nobody got left behind. He looked after all the workers. And so he always would tell the employees of this construction group, I this is a family. It's like a family to me. And when he told that story, boom, that everybody got it.
Yeah.
That's what he means by family. And you know what? Through COVID, he never missed a payroll. He did whatever it took. Dude, that's such a powerful thing that you just told us.
Well, and think about that example. I love that example, because I think of that in terms of, if nobody gets left behind, and you're talking about construction, that means we all look out for each other in terms of safety too.
Yeah.
And you don't have to say we have a value of safety. Safety is number one or something like that. If you're all thinking no one gets left behind, you're going, I don't want my coworker to get hurt. And so I'm going to make sure that they're following safety protocols too, just because I care. Not because it's a word on the wall, but because that's who we are as a community.
And I guess it's true, right? That if you use a word or you tell something, it's from your own experiences. So what you think a family culture looks like could be completely different. You tell a guy like me that, and I didn't have family and it was toxic. And it's like, what are you talking about? Teach me what family looks like. Just on another direction here, I started reading the Bible when I had my brain injury. And you know what? It was the Bible that taught me how to love and care and respect people. It wasn't what I learned in a toxic home. Yeah. And so all these people that I met in my life talked about family values, family. It took me up to that point in my life to understand that I don't really even know what that means. What family means. So I really love how you brought that point home there. And explain that.
And that's where story also helps, because you can tell your story about what family means, and your friend who grew up in Punjab can tell his story about what family means. Well, although you didn't have the exact same experience, they don't mean the same things to you. You understand each other better now because you've defined that term through the stories, through the experiences that you've had with it.
Amazing. And by the way, I can live vicariously through somebody like that now, because it's actually like this craving. I wanted to be feeling what it's like to have a family. And that one more thing I want to tell you, and this is just something personal, that I have a friend who's in palliative, and he's probably 2 weeks left, stage 4 cancer, all this. And I've been going back and forth to the hospital, and he just published his memoir just before all this started. And you know what? I'm sitting beside him, and I said this to Anna. I I've never been close to anybody like that. I wasn't close to my father. I didn't have something. So this was the biggest test of me. And when I started going and seeing him, I don't know where it came out of me, man, but I would hold his hand, and I took out my Billy Graham, daily wisdom book, and I would read to him. And my wife was sitting beside me. This was a week ago, and she said, after on the way home, she said, when you read to him, he's staring right in your eyes. And I got all choked up, and I started realizing that I want to go back to the hospital now almost every day and spend time with him. It's because deep inside, this was like what I never had. And
Yeah.
it's almost like he's becoming a father to me. Now I know I'm going to lose him, but the power of storytelling goes so deep that here's me who find my way to a complete stranger, and we're sharing stories with each other while he's on his last days. And it's moving me in a way that I never imagined it would. It's changing my life. It's amazing what the stories are.
One of the things I tell people all the time is take note of those moments you have emotional reactions to things.
Wow.
While you're in the middle of this, you may not see exactly what the lesson is that you can help other people through after. But at some point, that lesson is going to pop out to you and you're going to go, oh, this is how I can share that experience in a way that teaches this lesson to people to help them in a way that's important to them. And so note those moments in the middle of them. Sometimes we don't even know what the lesson is or what we can, how we can use that. But if you take note of those moments, the lesson will come out. The lesson will come out of those emotional reactions that you have.
Yeah, listen, as we move to wrap up, I just want to ask you to hold up that book again, because what you just said to us, everybody, Mark Carpenter with his book, Master Storytelling, that was in the book, and you just told us that. I just want everybody to know. You said, it's almost like creating a storybook, a bank of little stories.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before. It's such a gift you've given us. It's like, because sometimes we have these little moments like that. His name's Hattie, this fellow I'm telling you about, Hattie Abra. And that little moment that passed between us, it's like I totally forgot about it, but it's with you here that it came out.
Yeah.
I'm going to go write that down now, because somewhere in one of my public talks or my teachings or maybe the next book I write, it's going to have some meaning. Thank you for that. Pretty amazing.
It's really interesting. People will say, well, I don't have any good experiences that I can turn into stories. And it's like, yeah, you do. you just haven't paid attention to them.
Yeah.
And so, take note of those things. And then when you're looking for a story, you look back at that bank and go, oh my gosh, it's that experience that teaches this point that I want to make here. And you've got it.
Amazing. Hey, listen, I just want to do something now with you as we move to wrap up. I do this with all the guests that come on the show. I think you know this. I'm just going to put another image on the screen there, everybody. That's my alter ego, Tommy, there. And I have a notepad, and as the guest talking, I just script a word. So I'm going to honor you with 4 words. These are, you can call them leadership words that can't come to mind. First one is mastery. What you've done here, and I think you must realize the power of how you're changing the world. You are mastery. The second word is fun. It's a hell of a lot of fun being with you, but I think that's the part, and I read it in your book, about if a story can have some humor, some laughter, some fun, and I'm drawing in teeth for that. So I so love that. Third one is love. There's an aura, there's something about you, just the way you are. My professor calls it a way of being, but in order for me to be with someone, they have to make me want to be, and you do that really well. So being. And then the last word, I'm just going to call you a maven. That if you read Outliers, I know you probably heard of the book, but everybody, a maven is somebody when you go, if I want to know everything I can about storytelling and having fun doing it, and he's the guy, Mark. So on that note, Mark, back to you for your last word. And before I honor you with a little award, tell us where we can get your work, learn about the book, get hold of you.
Well, thank you. And first, you've honored me just by having me here, and you've used that phrase that you're honoring me for things. I just want to honor you for the work you're doing too, Tom, because you are bringing your best self. You're bringing the best parts of you to the world by making these connections too. And so I just, I hope everybody, I assume that's why everybody's listening, is because they know who you are, that you do this, but I honor the great work that you're doing. You can always connect with me through the website, master-storytelling.com. It's been scrolling on the screen.
Right there, yep.
The big thing is you have to have that little dash between master and storytelling to get
okay.
to the right site. I'm on LinkedIn pretty regularly, and so I am always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Just look for Mark Carpenter, Salt Lake City area. Look for the Master Storytelling book. It'll be there in the background in my picture. And so I'm always happy to connect with people. Would love to talk to anybody about this. You can tell I'm passionate enough about it. I'll talk to anybody. The other thing is, when you go to our website, go to the free stuff page. Yep. There's a little file there that's called the Story Catcher. It's a free download of just a PDF. And it helps get to what Tom and I were just talking about, capturing those moments in your life that can be good experiences that could turn into good stories. And then what do you do with those? How do you be more intentional about crafting those into stories that have the impact that you want to connect to people, and again, to lead with greater humanity?
All right, that's fantastic. Everyone, the free stuff page, we'll put that in the show notes too. And I was actually going to ask you, where do I get that? It was in the book. But I'm going to go download that right after this and tell as many people as I can about it. What a great tool you've created there. Last thing is, it's awards time. So I'm going to just ask you to focus on my screen for a minute and see in the background there, Mark, on the flat screen, there's an image. Now, I usually grab one and I bring it to the screen. So hold on. All right, I'm going to try do a different camera angle here. We'll tidy all this up. So let's yeah, okay. All right, so you see me kind of trying to get this out of the package. So these are challenge coins. You've probably heard of them. They were started in World War I, I think. And there's a little insert in the package. Challenge coins were used by the military or soldiers to commit to each other, community. And they had fun with it. So your kind of thing. They would say, if you didn't have your coin with you, well, you had to buy drinks at the officers club, maybe. My father was in AA for 25 years. They had their own version of coins. First responders do. When I started this show in 2000, gosh, I'm dating myself. I think it was 2016. I wanted to have an award. So I had these hand painted and crafted in the US.
They're awesome.
Yeah, they're beautiful, hand-painted, crafted, raised letters. The front is the image of the show, and the back is actually the hero's journey narrative. And so these are carried now by, I think I've done 280 interviews. We've released most of those. These are carried in the pockets of quiet warriors, people like you who have done that thinking and turned their life into something to give back. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior community or tribe, if you want to call it.
I will carry that with great honor.
Awesome. And so I'll get your address and we'll get that out to you, but it's fantastic. And, maybe we can work one in where we can give a second one for your partner if you want to do that, because you've co-authored the book.
Yeah, he's going to have to earn it though. He's going to have to earn it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the same thing. It's like, but so welcome to that. And you know what, we're gonna be talking again. I'll have you back for sure. We'll get a 5-star review posted for the book. So everybody get the book, read it, post a review. And I think we've met for a reason. So thank you for being here, Mark. It's been just fantastic.
I'm a believer that we meet for reasons too. And so I really appreciate that. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed my time with you and look forward to our continuing connection now that I'm in the Quiet Warrior community.
That's just awesome. Everybody, find that true passion, like you heard Mark J. Carpenter talk about. Find that purpose in your life and live the life that you deserve and desire. And we'll see you all again. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca.
We're just going to take it offline here, ending the stream.